Welcome to TARDISian Files. Hello listeners! This week many of you may have seen that the first instalment of the long-awaited Fugitive Doctor audio range dropped this week. And, like the loyal Joe Martin stan I am, of course I was one of the many people who waited 2 and a bit years with the audios on their pre-order list. Therefore, it's only natural that this week I will be reviewing the first 3 episodes in this range and giving an overall impression of Fugitive Doctor Most Wanted. Without further ado, let's jump right in, and for those listening ahead, there will be spoilers. The overall story arc of Fugitive Doctor Most Wanted is the Fugitive Doctor is on the run from both the Time Lords, namely a task force led by Lady Cosmogon, and a lucrative agency which she has no idea about, the Division. Somewhere along the way, her memories have been blocked out, leaving her unaware of what she's done to put a bounty on her head, and having to think on her feet as she jumps through time with 2 objectives: escape and hide. In episode 1, Fast Times, this sees the Doctor narrowly escape capture by a fellow Time Lord operative in the midst of an unknown mission, only to be apprehended and sent to the prison ship Punishment, awaiting Cosmogon's task force, who've been sent there to retrieve her. While there, she meets an alien fugitive known as Fade, who's also awaiting collection from her pursuers, a race of cyborg beings the Doctor has not met before, the Daleks. Getting dragged into Fade and her people's conflict with the Daleks, the Doctor and Fade engage in a game of temporal spatial chase, tricking the Daleks into flying headfirst into Oppenheimer's nuclear test blasts in New Mexico in the 1940s. The Doctor then returns Fade to her people's resistance base, where she's able to hand over a data drive containing essential intel that will allow her people to push the Daleks out of their star system once and for all. The Doctor is nearly apprehended by Cosmogon, though the Time Lady is forced by Fade and her people to allow the Doctor to escape. This story hits the ground running, and it sets the tone for the series. Within the space of a day, the Doctor's life is upended as a Time Lord on deployment, and she's suddenly being pursued by her own kind for reasons that she's unaware of. This brings out the more self-involved side of this Doctor, which we originally saw in the TV episode Fugitive of the Jadoon, building more on this unique personality, where the Doctor is on the run and willing to do whatever it takes to evade capture, to the point where she's unwilling to get dragged into other people's business or drag them into hers. However, this Doctor isn't just selfish and callous, because in true Doctor fashion, she still saves the crew and prisoners of the ship Punishment when the Daleks hurl the ship out of orbit and down onto the planet below. And she even goes through a lengthy game of chase to save Fade from the Daleks and ensure she gets her intel to her people that need it back at the base. And that's before the Doctor even really understands just how much of a threat the Daleks are. This transitions nicely into our next pro, which is the Daleks. We've seen Daleks not know the Doctor, while the Doctor's known them before, but we've not actually seen Daleks who knew the Doctor meeting a version of the Doctor who hadn't met them before. This added a layer of complexity to the story, as the Fugitive Doctor had to think on her feet when saving Fade from the Daleks, as she hadn't yet had centuries to do combat with the Daleks and learn to anticipate all of their moves. And this brings us to the very obvious reference to the first Doctor story, The Chase. The scenes from which this 1965 classic gets its name from are famous for the exact same plot device used in this story, the Doctor being chased by the Daleks through the time vortex. I wonder if the first Doctor had a subconscious infocutaneous retrofold memory loop which gave him the idea to use this tactic against them again centuries later. The only thing that's really confusing about this episode is how it begins, with the Doctor on a mission with a fellow Time Lord. At first, I thought that she was on a mission for Division, but when you listen to the following stories, this is when it's made more obvious that the Doctor's memory has been wiped, and she no longer remembers what Division is. This does make me wonder exactly when was her memory wiped, and why was she on a mission for Gallifrey rather than Division? Was it part of a mission for Division that she needed to remove all traces of them from her mind to infiltrate Gallifreyan forces, and ended up getting too close to Gallifrey for Division's liking, hence why they're after her? Well, we don't know yet. Moving on to episode 2, The Legend of Baba Yaga, This sees the Doctor arrive in the 17th century in Russia, where she comes face to face with a real-life folklore tale. A girl named Vasilista, and a witch known as Baba Yaga. After detecting the remnants of a psychic storm, the Doctor discovers that Baba Yaga, her hut, and her seemingly otherworldly powers are actually the result of a disembodied TARDIS having landed there. Lacking an outer shell, the TARDIS matrix merged with the hut and the surrounding area, and as a result of the overload from the psychic storm, it adapted the hut and the ordinary human woman living inside into a real-life version of Baba Yaga, sustained by the locals' belief in the legend. The Doctor disables the system, and so the hut and Baba Yaga are returned to their natural state, however not before the Doctor was able to get Baba Yaga to tell her what she had seen was missing from her mind, or give her a way to conceal herself from the Time Lord. Okay, starting off with the plot, I love obscure folklore, and I think it was a very well done adaptation of the original Baba Yaga and Vasilista the Brave story. I think it's important to bring these kind of tales into the narrative, especially to an audience that may not be familiar with these fairy tales, because it allows you to not only reimagine them, but it also means that the listener is actually learning about folklore from outside of their culture. Speaking of narrative, I really like that in this episode that the Doctor was more of a spectator for the most part, watching the fairy tale as she knew it to play out, while offering Vasilista advice and guidance at times to keep the tale on track, and eventually helping her save her stepmother and her sister from Baba Yaga's cursed skull. Because of this, the Doctor isn't as in control of the situation as usual, having to work everything out from scratch, while ultimately her reasons for being there is to get help herself from Baba Yaga for her own problem. Additionally, the fact that the main enemy in this story wasn't actually Baba Yaga herself, but actually a disembodied TARDIS was quite an interesting twist. Usually TARDISes are a part of the solution, not the problem in these stories. So to see a TARDIS get absolutely wrecked and ended up wreaking havoc on some Russian peasants made for quite an interesting storyline. The only real problem I have with this story is the explanation for how the TARDIS ended up getting wrecked in the first place. First of all, 1. Why were the Time Lords even investigating a psychic storm that, for one reason or another, coincided with the time period where Baba Yaga's myth was prevalent? 2. What caused the storm? And 3. How is it powerful enough to rip a TARDIS's outer and inner dimensions apart, leaving basically just the software behind? You'd think that for something of that magnitude, the psychic storm would be considered more of an important plot device, and it would be more developed as the story went on. But none of these questions really get answered. And this is a problem I have with many of the new audios, is that seemingly important plot devices are written into the story, but they're not adequately explained, or they're explained obscurely, leaving the listeners to piece it together themselves. Moving on to episode 3, The Dimension of Lost Things. This episode opens with the Doctor once again being pursued by the Time Vortex, this time by Cosmogon and her task force. The Doctor tears open a crack in the continuum to escape, and ends up in a dimension made up of a patchwork of different biomes, with the ground littered with objects from history, and inhabited by people who've disappeared throughout the centuries. The land is also plagued by time storms which blow across the land and literally blow away people's memories, and time pockets which swallow up the inhabitants and deposit them in a random point in the land's timeline. This includes a version of the Doctor, who's supposedly been living in the land for a year, though she claims that her memories are a bit hazy. All the while they're in the land, the Doctor keeps receiving flashbacks of a terrifying beast that she's gone up against in her past, though she can't remember what it is or where she's met it before. The Doctor meets an alien freedom fighter and a missing 1920s mountaineer, Sandy Irvine, along with her alternate self. The foursome make their way across the land to escape in the TARDIS away from Cosmogon, who's arrived and pursues them across the land, only for the alternate Doctor to lead them to what she claims to be her TARDIS, a Type 30. Knowing this to be wrong, the main Doctor confronts her alternate self, who reveals that she is actually a past version of the Doctor, sent to collect her by Division, an agency which the present Doctor has no knowledge of. The past Doctor tricks Cosmogon, allowing them to escape through a time pocket, depositing them to before the conversation began, giving them the extra time they need to flee to the present Doctor's TARDIS. The past Doctor doesn't reveal anything, though she implies that she may not report back to Division. And when the Doctor returns Sandy Irvine to his proper time and place, they find that he was actually set to disappear right before he was taken into the land of lost things. And so, she and the alien freedom fighter instead convince him to join the alien rebellion to help liberate her homeworld from invaders. The Doctor goes off once more, having another terrifying flashback of her past. Starting off, I again really love this setting. I love settings that take place in random lands, because they provide the perfect place for writers to apply the anything goes rule, as regular physics and logic don't apply. I love how the land was described to be a mishmash of different biomes filled with random junk and spooky shadows, as well as other temporal phenomena. Every aspect of the setting was well used and played a role in the story. Additionally, I love it when the writers use historical figures who've disappeared and write them a good ending, since it plays to many listeners' desires to hear that these brilliant people actually got a happy ending, even if it is fictional. Finally, the wibbly-wobbly Doctor Timeline-y twist at the end was something I did not see coming. It really begs the question as to what did the Doctor actually do that was so bad that even her past self is pursuing her. Hopefully, we'll find out in Volume 2. Unlike the last few episodes, there were a couple more cons with this episode that I saw, including the explanation of how the Doctor ended up in the dimension of lost things. A junkyard outside of time and space isn't anything new, you can ask House. However, the means of getting there seemed a little bit over the top, as it was described as the Doctor effectively destroying the fifth dimension where space and time interact. On one hand, it shows the length this Doctor is willing to go to evade capture, which is consistent with her character, and separates her from the post-Division Doctors, but it's also another example of a seemingly important plot device that just isn't expanded or explored beyond its immediate purpose for the story, and you'd think that something that has such damage would have more serious repercussions. Additionally, the Doctor's flashbacks. I feel they served as more of a distraction in an already fairly confusing story, and probably could have been introduced at the resolution and the end of the episode as something the Doctor disregards at first, but revisits at the end. To have the flashbacks constantly throughout the episode felt a little disjointed, despite the fact that it was a side effect of the time rings. Finally, and this is no fault on the writers' part since they started developing this story in 2022, but in real life, Sandy Irvine's partial remains were finally found in 2024 after 100 years of being trapped in a glacier and potential sightings over the decades. While it is something that listeners would only know if they've looked it up, it still casts a bit of a shadow over the fictionalised Sandy Irvine, knowing that his real life counterpart has actually been confirmed as deceased. So, overall, this range was a great expansion to the Fugitive Doctor's lore. It's given us a mystery about her past, it shows us what she's like in a crisis, and it's made a wonderful use of historical figures, folklore tales, and even references to classic events in the main show to deliver an epic first instalment to the Fugitive Doctor series. I cannot wait to listen to part 2 of these stories, and you can guarantee that there will be a review waiting for all listeners once the audio stories have landed. What did you guys think of the episode? Did you agree with our review? Did you notice something we missed? Let us know in the comments section on our YouTube channel and our social media pages. You can listen to all episodes of the podcast on YouTube, YouTube Music, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. You can also follow us on Instagram and TikTok at TARDISian Files Podcasts to get the latest updates on upcoming episodes. And as always, see you next time on TARDISian Files.